Chinese Nationalists in the Golden Triangle. After their defeat in the Chinese Civil War in 1949, thousands of Kuomintang soldiers fled south across the border into the mountainous region where Burma, Laos, and Thailand meet, a lawless area that would become known as the Golden Triangle. The CIA saw these anti-communist fighters as a valuable proxy force that could harass the new People's Republic of China from the outside. So the agency provided them with weapons, supplies, and operational support, hoping to keep pressure on Mao's regime from the southwest. But these soldiers were cut off from any legitimate supply lines or funding from Taiwan, and they needed money to survive, so they turned to the only viable local economy in that remote region, which was the opium trade. They began by taxing and protecting poppy farmers and heroin laboratories, but they quickly became direct participants in the trafficking themselves, effectively transforming into the world's first modern narco-army. For more than 2 decades, this CIA-backed force helped turn the Golden Triangle into the largest producer of opium and heroin on the planet. And that flood of cheap, high-quality heroin poured into American cities throughout the 1960s and 1970s, fueling an addiction crisis that destroyed countless families and communities. The Nicaraguan Contras and the crack epidemic. Fast forward to the 1980s, and the Reagan administration was determined to overthrow the leftist Sandinista government in Nicaragua, so the CIA began training and arming a rebel army known as the Contras. But when Congress passed the Boland Amendment, which cut off all official funding for the Contras, the administration found itself in a difficult position because it wanted to continue the war without congressional approval. The solution was a covert supply network run by National Security Council staffer Oliver North, and this network quickly became intertwined with drug smugglers who could provide both money and logistics. The CIA worked directly with individuals and organizations deeply involved in cocaine trafficking, effectively looking the other way because defeating the Sandinistas was the only priority that mattered. In 1982, CIA Director William Casey and Attorney General William French Smith signed a secret memorandum of understanding that explicitly exempted the CIA from having to report drug smuggling by its assets to the Department of Justice, creating a policy where fighting communism was legally prioritized over preventing a drug epidemic at home. One particular drug ring connected to the Contras began selling massive quantities of cocaine in south-central Los Angeles, and they introduced the drug on consignment to the Crips and Bloods gangs, who converted it into crack, a cheap and highly addictive form of cocaine that could be sold in small doses to poor communities. This single decision is widely credited with sparking the nationwide crack epidemic, which led to an explosion of gang violence, a wave of addiction that swept through inner cities, and the mass incarceration of generations of young Black and brown Americans, all because the CIA had decided that its geopolitical goals justified associating with drug traffickers. The Battle of Jaji and the birth of Al-Qaeda. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and the Carter and Reagan administrations saw an opportunity to bleed the Soviet military in its own Vietnam-style quagmire, so the CIA launched Operation Cyclone, the largest covert operation in the agency's history. The United States funneled billions of dollars, thousands of Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, and sophisticated guerrilla warfare training to the Afghan Mujahideen fighting the Red Army, but a secondary force also emerged during this war. A contingent of radical Muslim volunteers from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Algeria who came not just to fight for Afghanistan, but to wage a global jihad against all superpowers. Among these Arab volunteers was a wealthy Saudi engineer named Osama bin Laden, who used his fortune to build a cave complex in the mountains near the Pakistani border, a base he called Al-Masada, which means the Lion's Den. In April of 1987, the Soviet command decided to crush this symbol of Arab resistance once and for all, so they deployed their absolute best, the Spetsnaz, the elite special forces whose training in reconnaissance, sabotage, and direct action was feared throughout the world. The men defending the Lion's Den were not soldiers. They were mostly Arab civilians, engineers, teachers, and students who had come to Afghanistan with more faith than training, and they faced the most lethal light infantry on the planet. The battle quickly devolved into close quarters fighting inside the cave complex, where rifles became useless and men fought with knives, bayonets, shovels, and bare hands, a brutal intimacy that is rare in modern warfare. The Soviets bombed the hills with such ferocity that the landscape was transformed into craters and rubble. And yet, despite the Spetsnaz's reputation and the overwhelming firepower, the Lion's Den did not fall. The Arab volunteers held their ground. Now, militarily speaking, the battle did not change the strategic balance of the war. The Soviets lost a handful of Spetsnaz operators, while the Arabs lost perhaps 50 men. But this is not how war works in the human imagination. A Saudi journalist named Jamal Khashoggi was embedded with the Arab volunteers, and he chronicled every detail of the fight: the Spetsnaz knives, the bombing runs, the untrained civilians standing their ground against the world's most fearsome special forces, and his dispatches transformed a small engagement into an epic legend. Across the Muslim world, the story spread like wildfire. The idea that God had blessed these Arab fighters because they had defeated the superpower against all odds, and this myth caused thousands of new recruits to flock to bin Laden's cause, bringing money, skills, and fanatical dedication. This battle did not just help the Afghan resistance, it created two dangerous myths simultaneously. First, that the Arab volunteers had succeeded where others had failed, and second, that bin Laden himself was a great military leader and strategist, a reputation he did not earn but would use to build his organization. In 1988, bin Laden formally created Al-Qaeda, which means the base, using the prestige he had gained from the Lion's Den to attract the most committed and capable jihadists from across the Arab world. After the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan in 1989, the United States largely abandoned the region, but the thousands of trained and radicalized Arab fighters returned to their home countries or sought new enemies, and their primary target eventually became the United States. The same network of training camps that the CIA had indirectly supported, the same mythology forged in the caves of Jaji, went on to produce the masterminds behind the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, the 1998 embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania, and finally the attacks of September 11, 2001. The Lion's Den did not fall, but what rose from it fell on America 15 years later.